Well, good morning, St. Mark's. It is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. If you don't know me, I am Shawn. I usually get to be with our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. Shout out to the student section in the back. Let's go. And today, I'm especially excited to be with you for two reasons. Number one, because we get to continue our series walking through mental health, based out of the book by Craig Groeschel called Winning the War in Your Mind. If you want the book, by the way, you can pick it up at our coffee shop or on Amazon or wherever else you can find books. It is fantastic. But the second, and perhaps more reason I'm excited for this morning is because it's Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Do we have any Star Wars fans in the room? Anybody here grow up and excited by Star Wars? Okay, quick poll if y'all can help me out. I asked the first service, and they did not disappoint. So I'm hoping you guys won't either. Of the Star Wars fans in the room, if you would call yourself that, how many of you would say the original trilogy is the best? Anybody would say, okay, we got clap. We got people who are big fans of that. Okay, I'm with you. I agree. Anybody who's brave enough to say the prequels are the best? Prequels, Anakin, Obi-Wan. Okay. We've got two. You're brave. I'm with you. I like those as well. Is there anyone willing to say the Disney sequel trilogy is the best? Okay. Nobody in this service. We had one last service. If there's anybody in here where that is what you think and you're just too ashamed to stick up your hand, good. That's right. And we have prayer banners on the sides if you want prayer. No, I'm joking. It is a movie series that I have always been a fan of. See, I am a child of the 90s, and so I was hitting elementary school in the early 2000s, right as the Star Wars prequel series was hitting, right as it dominated culture. I mean, at that time in the early 2000s, it's not just that Star Wars was a movie series that a lot of people watch. Like, it owned the culture. And some of y'all remember this. Like, you would go into Target or Walmart or Toys R Us back when that existed, and you would walk through, and there would be two whole aisles of Star Wars toys. I mean, you had the toys, you had the Legos, you had the video games. Yeah, see, I owned, I think, just about all of those that are up there. My toys were Star Wars. I had one of those plastic lightsabers, and I think I still have welts from my brothers and I whacking each other with those. And that was life. Star Wars was life for me growing up in elementary school, and I am to this day a big fan of those movies. But I got to tell you, a couple of years ago, I had an experience where I had a friend who had never seen Star Wars before. My age, so I didn't know how that happened, but I'd never seen it before. So I got a group of friends together, and we sat down to watch A New Hope, because that's where you got to start, right? You got to start in release order. And so we sat down to watch it with a whole bunch of people, some of whom had and some of whom hadn't seen it before. And an interesting thing happened. Me, who loves Star Wars, who's grown up with it, where it's everything. It's the best movie saga of all time. My perspective shifted as I looked at it through the lens of someone who had never seen Star Wars before, because something occurred to me that had never occurred to me before, which is A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie released, opens with 40 minutes of two robots wandering around in the desert, lost. And that's not the most exciting way to start the most epic saga of all time. Just watching two droids getting lost, and one of them doesn't even have dialogue. So it's like nothing much happens for half of one of the greatest movies of all time. And so this friend that I was watching with wound up not enjoying the film, as did many of the people there, and not wanting to watch the next one when I suggested watching it later. And I was like, no, it gets better, I promise. But I couldn't buy it back. And I realized something, which is that I had been looking at Star Wars through the lens of my childhood. And they were looking at Star Wars through the lens of their adult eyes. And because of that, they saw it very differently. Now, why do I share that with you? One, because I really want to talk about Star Wars. That's really the real reason why. But number two, because what we're talking about in this series about winning the war in our mind is this idea that sometimes there are some lies, there are some ideas that get rooted in our heads, and they wind up becoming lenses by which we interpret the world around us with. Just like I saw Star Wars through the lens of my childhood, sometimes you and I look at the world around us through the lens of something that was put into us, some lie, some untruth, something back when we were a kid. I'll tell you this, one that I've struggled with myself is, maybe you've felt this too, is that when you succeed, it's just average. Like A's is normal, right? Getting an A is normal. That's just adequate. So when you succeed, that's not this great reason to celebrate, that's just normal. But then when you fail, oh, that's real bad. And you don't know what to do with yourself when you fail. Maybe I'm the only one. Or maybe for you, it's almost kind of the opposite, where you feel like failure is normal. That's you feel like a failure. And so anytime you do succeed, you do something right, you interpret it as kind of a one-off fluke. It's not normal. It doesn't mean you're a success. You're still feel like a failure. Maybe you're in the middle of a crisis and you feel like this crisis will never end. Maybe if we got down into it, you would say, I'm unwanted, or worse, unwantable. Maybe you feel like everyone's nice, but if they were actually being honest, they don't like you that much. And no matter how many times you get invited to something, no matter how many moments prove that out to not be exactly accurate, you can't help but feel in your heart, they're faking it. They don't really like me. They just tolerate me. They have to. The good Christian people, that they can't exclude me. Maybe you feel like you're fake. And if people knew the real you, they wouldn't like you. Maybe you feel like a burden on those around you. Maybe you feel inadequate as a parent or unloved as a child. Maybe you feel like it's all your fault. Why do I even try? Can I tell you, each and every one of those I have felt at some point just in this last year. And I know that in a room this size, there's a lot of lenses that we look at our lives through. There's a lot of lies that were put into us. I was reading a book several years ago, and I'll apologize now because I tried looking for it, and I couldn't remember the name of the book that I read this in. And so if I get a couple of details wrong and you later read it, I apologize, but this is a true story. There's a girl named Sarah who was in elementary school, and she didn't quite fit in with the other kids in her class. She always felt a little bit on the outside, had a hard time making friends with the other people. School wasn't really her thing, grades and that. She had a hard time paying attention, and over the years, what started with just kind of not having friends turned into getting picked on, and getting picked on turned into bullying. And with time, it just became clear she was the black sheep of the class. And to make matters worse, nowhere was that more clear than with the teacher. The teacher looked at her through a lens of Sarah is a bad kid and a bad student. And so after a year of being picked on and bullied by the other class there and by the teacher as well, there was one particular day where it kind of all hit ahead towards the end of the year. And for whatever reason that day, maybe she wasn't able to pay attention, maybe it was just random, I don't know, but the teacher, as the recess bell hits, stops the class and says to the class, on your way out to recess, I want each of you to walk up to the whiteboard, grab a marker, and write down something that you hate about Sarah on the whiteboard. Then you can go to recess. And whether for fear of being bullied themselves, whether because of peer pressure, or whether because they actually hated Sarah, one by one, they each walked up to the whiteboard and walked through something that they believed about Sarah. Sarah is ugly. Sarah has no friends. Sarah is weird. Sarah dresses funny. Sarah is unloved. Sarah is dumb. As thing after thing is put onto that whiteboard. I mean, what would you do if you were Sarah? You can't help but watch. Tears start coming to her eyes, and of course they do. And eventually it's just her and the teacher left in the room, and the teacher turns to her, says, I want you to stay in during recess and look at this whiteboard, and I want you to think about your behavior. And then she turns and she leaves the room. I think all of us, when we hear that story, go, who's that teacher? I want to talk to that principal right now because that is not okay. I think all of us feel that way. And I think all of us too, if we knew Sarah, and I wish I did, we would want to wrap her up in a big church-wide hug and say, that is not true. You are loved, you are treasured, and yet here's what I know. In a room this size, I know there are people in here who've had a similar experience of some kind in your past. Maybe it wasn't a teacher, maybe it was a parent who said something to you, maybe it was a grandparent, maybe it was a friend, maybe it was just something that happened at school, but it left some damage. It left some lies that have become a lens by which you look at the world around you. Sarah goes on, of course the story doesn't end there. She grows up and has friends and goes to college and then gets married and all these great, wonderful things. But in the back of her mind, every step of the way, she knows that for every friend she makes, it's fake. She knows that every time her husband says, I love you, he doesn't mean it. How could you mean it? I'm ugly, I'm unloved, I'm unlovable. Because that was put into her at a young age. And I know we got some lies, y'all. And maybe it's as severe as that, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's something from how you grew up, or maybe it's a behavior that you've leaned into. But my bet is this: there is something on the inside that you would love to shift and you would love to change. As we're talking about winning the war in our mind, we're talking about winning the war against the shadow side of ourselves that wants to do us harm and do us damage. So what do we do about it? Well, I want to start with this. We're in good company. If you struggle with that kind of thing, you're not alone. Would you believe that Paul struggles with the same thing? Paul, the apostle. Paul, probably the second most important person to ever live in terms of church history after, Jesus. And that's Paul. Paul, the guy who writes more books of the Bible than anybody else. And this is what Paul says in Romans 7, verse 15. He says this: I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. Here's what I don't like about this. Paul starts by saying, I don't understand what I do. Like, what do you mean? Paul, you're an apostle. Paul, you've written books of the Bible. Paul, you're the guy I go to understand what I do. You're the guy that I go to figure myself out, to figure God out, to figure life out, to figure out what I'm supposed to do and not do. And you're like, I don't know. Like, that doesn't help. Paul, come on. You're an apostle. But what I love about this is that maybe if Paul is struggling between getting the things that he wants to do, that he intends to do, that he knows God's calling him to do from here to here and from here to the outside into his actions, maybe it doesn't make us bad to struggle with it too. Maybe it doesn't make us a bad person. Maybe it just makes us a person. If Paul didn't have it all figured out, maybe that's a part of the journey. He keeps going in this passage. In verse 21, he adds this: so I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of what? My mind. And making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. You ever felt like that in a moment of crisis, in a moment when it feels like you're losing the war in your mind, that you are a wretched person? Where's my value? Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord, so that I myself, in my mind, am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin. There is something inside of us that wants us to hate ourselves and to destroy us, that wants us to lose the war in our minds so that we eat ourselves from the inside out. I think sometimes we think that sin is just when we decide not to pray or read our Bible in the morning, or sin is just when we're at the supermarket and we see a candy bar, so I can just slip it into my pocket on the way out. And it is that, but it's not just that. It's a sickness inside of us that wants to corrupt us, to believe lies, to believe the wrong things about ourselves, about those around us, about God. It is a nature that is within us that wants to destroy our minds and our hearts. And I love the way Paul articulates this, that he genuinely does delight in the law of God. It's here, but he has a real hard time getting it from here to here. And can I tell you how true that is? Listen, I preach the Bible for a living. And can I tell you the number of times when I've messed up or I've made some kind of mistake, and I know that God loves me, I know that nothing about that has changed, and yet getting that truth from here to here is a deep chasm, am I right? It is a hard bridge to cross that Paul is still struggling with. So if Paul is struggling with it, and we're struggling with it, what can we do about it? Well, I want to say this. I don't think there's anything I could say in one sermon that's going to fix this overnight. There's nothing Paul could say that would go, hey, do this and you're done. Like, I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I do think there are some tips and some strategies that throughout this series we are going to lean into that are going to bless us as we are winning this war in our mind. And what I want to do is I want to go back to the way Jesus fights sin. We're going to open up to Luke chapter 4. This is a story, if you know it, where Jesus is led into the wilderness and he is tempted by the devil. And I think as we look at the ways the devil tempts him, it is going to expose some ways in which lies and temptations and some false lenses by which we might look at the world tries to get us to believe the wrong things that are going to destroy our minds. We're going to see what Jesus uses to fight against those lies. Luke chapter 4, I'm going to open it up right at the beginning in verse 1. This is what it says. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them, he was hungry. Stop right there for a moment. I want to explain a little bit of the background of what's happening. Jesus has just left the Jordan River, and now he's on his way back towards Jerusalem. In the middle, there is a vast wilderness. I have been to this wilderness when I was in Israel about a decade ago, and it is treacherous. Now, if you're picturing the Sahara Desert, it's not the Sahara Desert. It is more wilderness than it is desert. It is rocks. There are thorns. There are thistles. But what there really are is a lot of hills. And I remember being there, and we stopped on the path of this road, and we're kind of overlooking the vast wilderness, and there are some deep valleys, and I had two friends who were with me who wanted to go down into one of the valleys because there were some sheep there, and there was a shepherd allowing his sheep to eat some of the grass that was down there. And so they start walking, and it took them, I don't know, maybe a minute and a half or whatever to walk down, and then they turned around, and they started trying to walk back up. But what looked like a gradual decline from the top became a steep incline as they were coming back up because you could not see it. And so they were becoming hand over hand, crawling hands and knees to get back up this cliff. And it took them the better part of an hour until eventually they finally made it to the top as we're all watching and laughing. And they flopped down on the ground exhausted. That was in the middle of the day in a time when it wasn't particularly hot. I want you to imagine Jesus starving, hungry. Point as something that's true in our own lives, which is for all of us, we are filled with these natural God. go haywire. Just like it is no wonder haywire. In the same way, it is no wonder that when our need, our drive for community is starving, our brains go haywire. These are good desires. There's nothing wrong with them. But when these things go unfulfilled and unsatisfied, we are tempted to look through the lens of our own desires. That is what Satan is tempting Jesus to do. And when we look at the world through that outlook, we find ourselves looking at what we don't have. So why is the solution, man shall not live on bread alone? And I want to put to you that what Jesus is saying is this: there's more at stake. There's a higher purpose here. You know, throughout time in history, there have always been people willing to fast and to forego food for short periods of time, long periods of time. There have always been people willing to sacrifice, people willing to give all the things up, all those natural desires that I mentioned, because they were living for a higher purpose. And that is true of us as well. When we live for something that goes beyond us, we live for something that's actually more important to who we are than to live for something beyond. We live for something that goes past us and that goes more. And suddenly the desires that we have in the moment kind of fade away a little bit. Can I tell you, when I'm at summer camp with a bunch of students and we hit that, you know, there's nothing else like it. And the way we do it is we're kind of all gathered together, and we have different students share their stories and testimonies of how God has changed their life both that week and what's happened in their past year. And as you see students open up and become vulnerable, some of them for the first time ever, and share, man, there's not a dry eye in the house. And it is so good because you can visualize with your own eyes God changing hearts and God changing lives right before you. And it is so good. And can I tell you what, in that moment, I don't care what else is happening. I don't care what I ate for lunch that day. I don't care what I feel like I don't have in my day-to-day living when I get back home, because in that moment, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I know I'm contributing something that goes far beyond and far beyond me. I know there's something worth sacrificing for and worth living for. And when we fill our lives with those moments, the whole game changes. So if you're in this room and you would say there was a natural, not bad, good desire that is going unfulfilled, it's no wonder things go haywire in the brain. But I would tell you this: that's not the thing that we live for. We live for something higher. But I don't want to leave this point without saying this too. Satan moves on and begins to do another temptation. And yet, in this moment, I want you to see something. Jesus is still hungry. I think sometimes we think that if we're just close enough with God, or if we just pray enough or hard enough, or if we just love God enough, these cravings will completely go away and shift. And I don't think you can pray your way out of a biological desire. I don't think that's actually the way it works, but here's what you can do. You can put it in its place so that you're in charge of it, not it's in charge of you. Me, it will all be yours. Jesus answered, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Satan is asking Jesus to see through the lens of his own path. I can almost imagine what this temptation means for Jesus in the moment. I mean, Jesus is God. He knows what's coming. He knows that for the next 3 years, he's going to suffer. He knows that he's going to be wandering around without a roof over his head, sleeping in the open air. He knows that at one moment, he's going to go to his hometown, and the people in his hometown, the people he grew up with, are going to try to stone him to death. He knows where it all ends. In about 3 years, he's going to be crucified, the most painful death ever invented by humanity, as he suffocates and bleeds out simultaneously, and as he has to look at his mother weeping while doing so. He knows what comes after, which is he rises from the dead and he comes back to life and he gets to visit with all these people that followed him. But then he goes back to heaven and knows what happens in the next few years. The next 100 years of church history is filled with persecution and watching the very people who walked with him, who did life with him, being killed for his name. And he watches that from heaven. He knows that as the church kind of becomes popular and as it gets some power, in time, it starts fighting wars and persecuting each other as they start to kill people in Jesus' name. He knows every battle, every conflict, everything that is to come. He sees all of that, including all the way up to us today and the pains and sufferings that we go through as we struggle with leaders in our imperfect world and all the things that we go through. He sees all of those moments, and what Satan is offering is in this moment, at this time, if you just worship me, I will put you in charge of earth, and you can make it right. Well, that sounds really good, doesn't it? Sounds like we would avoid a lot of pain. So why does Jesus say no? Because even though it might have made earth a little bit better in the short term, it would have made heaven empty. Jesus could have found freedom from the cross, but bondage forever to Satan. Sometimes we want to go down our own path, our own way, because in the moment it feels easier. In the moment, it feels right. But then we've wandered down this path, and we find ourselves in a place we never wanted to be and we never wanted to go. We can feel stuck, and it can eat us and destroy us from the inside out. I saw this quote this last week, and it stuck with me, and so I wanted to share it with all of you. It says this: sins feel like freedom until you try to stop. Sometimes we think we found our own way and our own path, but every time I've chased after my own path, can I tell you, it felt real good for a moment, and then it destroyed me from the inside out later. God's way is always better, even if sometimes harder. Satan has one more temptation. This is what he says. The devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus answered, it is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. I think Satan is asking Jesus to see through the lens of our own expectations.